Hey everyone, Reaper here again with another video. We're going to the more classic view where I just show the book. This is how I used to make videos, so it's always nice to do this every now and then, and I'm sure no one's too disappointed that you're not going to see my face. Anyway, the point of this video, this is as you could tell by the title, this is my top 25 books. Key books in my collection. Now this list is as of 2018, even though it's 2019. Actually, I've made a purchase or two that would most likely be in the top 15. So that will have to wait for another top 25 video years down the line. I say years down the line because I made a video like this about almost 4 years ago. So I thought it would be nice to do an update to it. And if I remember correctly, the summer of 2018, a lot of people in the community, summer into fall, were doing top 50 books in my collection. I wanted to do something similar to that, an update, like I just said, to my top 25. But I was going to originally do it in November, but things happened, things got delayed, and now I'm doing it for this video. A couple more things before a thing or two before we go on with this video. I understand that some people do not like these type of videos where they're showing off big books and so forth and so on, and absolutely it is showing off. There's no doubt about it. But there are many different videos out there that show off in many different ways. But it's true. People show off in many different ways. And despite that, no matter what big books you have, there's always someone out there, whether it's in the community, on YouTube, Instagram, making videos, or does not make videos, that probably have something better. I can't tell you how many times I posted on Facebook where I'm showing off a book. I just got this, I just got that, and somebody shows off, hey, I got that too, and it's obviously 4 or 5 grades higher. That's all good. I like seeing many different things. That's why I watch videos in the community. That's why I watch certain YouTubers. I like seeing a variety of different things, whether it's big books, good grades, low grades, topics, and so forth. Once again, those that don't like these type of videos, I have other videos on my YouTube channel, like my EC videos that concentrate on my love for EC. When it comes to the movies of the 1970s and soon to be the HBO show, my comic book history, and other discussion videos for those that are turned off by big key showings. You're more than welcome to check that out if you wish. So without further ado, I'm going to begin my top 25. And we will start at number 25 with this. Giant Size X-Men number 1. This is a book, not this particular copy, but this is a book I've had since 1994. I was a decade off from the year I was going to say. Since 1994, I went to a comic book convention, a local comic book convention at a hotel. I had $50 in my pocket and a couple of those recently released Spider-Man trading cards. I went up to the guy. He was selling his low-grade copy. It was probably a 3.0. At best, 3.0 complete for $60 or $65 or whatever it was. I had $50 in my pocket, and I said, here, I have some Spider-Man cards, and he's like, okay, and he gave it to me. So he took pity on me. That book I sold a number of years ago to upgrade to this book. I know this book has been rising in price as of late, but, I was happy I was able to get a 6.5 since I had half that a number of years ago. So Giant Size X-Men number 1 at number 25. Like I said, this list is always changing. The last list I did was almost 4 years ago. It's totally different now, as I'm sure a year from now, 2 years from now, that this list will be totally different. Let me straighten this up just a little bit. This is Strange Tales 110. I told the story of how I got this. Kid on Facebook. Well, I shouldn't say kid. He's maybe mid-20s or whatever. His grandfather passed away, and he found this book in the attic. He was not a comic book collector, but he was a video game collector. He was looking to trade this book for a bunch of video games, and maybe half video games, half cash, which I obliged him. I gave him a lot of Nintendo games, which he liked. I was never really that big of a Nintendo fan. I was a fan of it when it first came out, but shortly, within a few years afterwards, I sort of drifted to PlayStation and all that. So I gave him a bunch of games and a little bit of cash, and he sent me this. It was my first and only trade deal off of Facebook, and it couldn't have gone by smoother. It was or more smoothly. It was a wonderful transaction. He was a good, honest guy, and I was glad I made him happy with all the games that he got. And I was happy getting this. This is probably a 3.0 copy. So 3.0, 3.5, whatever. It doesn't, it's cool enough for me. Probably one of the best Joker covers of the Golden Age. Now, I didn't say the best. I said probably one of the best. And that's just my opinion, too. Batman 49, where Joker's coming out, he's the genie. Great colors. Everyone who watches my channel knows that I like red backgrounds and yellow in the title. And I just love the way the Joker's drawn here. Just the way his hands are folded and his fingernails are actually like long, like almost like claws. So I'm very happy that I was able to add this to my collection several years ago. Definitely one of the best Joker covers, in my opinion, of the Golden Age. Here's another upgrade. I made this upgrade a couple years ago around the time I got that Strange Tales. Amazing Spider-Man 14. This is the first Green Goblin. In my original Top 25 video, I showed my original copy of this, which was probably like a 1.5 at best. I showed it over and over again as a book that probably should have been in that Top 25 back then, but it wasn't. It was just so low, It was probably like a $100 book. It just couldn't compete with the other books at that time in that video. But I upgraded it to this 4.0 copy. I'm glad I did when I did. Super happy to have it. This was one of the books. I'll talk about this in probably in a few minutes. This is gonna be a long video, so please bear with me. This was one of the books that I originally wanted to get back in '94 with $150. I'll talk about that story, like I said, in a few minutes. But I was unable to get it, or at least the condition that I wanted back then for that price. So it's finally nice to have a nice looking copy, or at least, in my opinion, a nice low-grade copy of the first Green Goblin, one of Spider-Man's biggest villains, if not his biggest villain, arguably. This book right here, this is the first cameo Galactus, but more importantly, it's the first Silver Surfer. Awesome Jack Kirby art. This is probably a 5.5, 6.0. This was another book that I wanted. I almost got in 1994. I went to one of those local hotel cons that I used to love. I used to always look forward to going to those. They were just wonderful. And, I'd go in there with maybe $20, $30, and just so excited to see what I would come home with, what I would add to my collection with that money. Now, obviously, I wasn't coming home with anything big because I couldn't afford anything really that big back then. So it was always a treat to go to those. Anyway, at one of those cons, I saw this book for $50. Now, I don't remember what condition it was, but a young guy, maybe he's like early 20s, and his girlfriend were there. And they were selling a couple of books, this being one of them. And I remember how upset I was that I didn't have $50. I remember I went out to the car to ask my mom if she could give me $50, which she said no. And I was pretty pissed, actually, because I thought I was really missing out on something. So, years later, now I've had this book for several years, but years later I went to my local comic book shop and he had the book, and I paid the price. I paid, it wasn't that much, but I paid what he wanted back then, and I'm glad I did. Even though I didn't get it for $50, I still got it relatively cheap because I now know within the last year, maybe 9 months, this book and number 49 have spiked because of speculation. Speculation will do that to a book. Whether the book drops in value, who knows? Who cares? I'm just very happy to have it. The Crypt of Terror 17. Like I said in the beginning of the video, if seeing key books isn't really something that you like, you don't really like it when people show key books, Well, you can always check out my EC books, my EC videos where I talk about my love of EC and so forth. My love of EC came from the HBO show. Okay, that's what got me initially started in comic books, by collecting the reprints. And then shortly after that, I got the Russ Cochran hardcovers, the black and white Russ Cochran covers, which I will show you as I adjust the camera as we go above. You see all the comic book boxes? Man, too much. Okay, you see the Berserkers, those Thundercat figures? Those are some of my favorite toys as a kid. But as you could see, up there, I think Top Spinner is... you see my head? Hello? Top Spinner is blocking the Tales from the Crypt hardcovers. But anyway, when I got those, that introduced me to this book. And one of my strong memories from back then was I took volume 1 of the Russ Cochran books, and it starts with this one right here. One Easter, we went to a relative's house, and I remember reading this particular issue on the way there. And that's what I always think about whenever I look at this book. Great issue. They were still transitioning, because this used to be Crime Patrol, and they were still, before they went full-blown terror or horror, they still had very crime-esque, without the supernatural stories in these books. Crypt of Terror 17 here. Still, this is probably the most supernatural story in the book. I forget what the name of the story is, but the one with the werewolf. And this issue also had the very first episode of the Tales from the Crypt series on HBO, The Man Who Was Death. That's the second story in this book, one of my favorites. So to say that, this is not an important book, it's an important book in the history of comics, but it's also a very important book for me for the things that I just talked about. Batman number 16, this is a partial swipe of another early Batman issue. I don't remember which one. This is not necessarily a great cover, but it's a pretty memorable issue. It's a memorable issue because it's the first appearance of Alfred. Okay, he was completely different when he was introduced in this issue than the Alfred that we all know and love. He was more of a bumbling detective who discovered the identities of Batman and Robin, and later that was retconned into him being the butler and being Batman's confidant and all that stuff. Now here's a book that I bought several years ago, and I'm glad I did because the prices are getting ridiculous. House of Secrets 92. Now I mentioned in my videos first appearances, this and that, that and this, and I'm sure you all know this is the first appearance of Swamp Thing and all that. But for the new viewer, for the new comic book collector that's into new comics and trying to get older comics who may not know or may not know much about DC, that's why I say these things. And then you could, further your research by looking it up and checking out subsequent appearances. This is the first Swamp Thing, drawn by Bernie Wrightson. Here, the model for this girl on the cover is Louise Simonson, who, as we all know, is married to Walter Simonson, and also who had a big involvement in the death of Superman storyline. But Bernie used her as a model for this girl on the cover, and here you see Swamp Thing creeping in. This is the first Swamp Thing, Alex Olson. I think the more famous Swamp Thing is Alec Holland, the one that shows up in Swamp Thing 1, and the one who had the movies. Remember those movies in the early 80s? The first one was pretty good. The second one was crap. Swamp Thing was based on, they used the Alec Holland Swamp Thing for those movies. So yeah, really good to have. I love this book. If you like Swamp Thing, obviously you want to have it, but just for the artwork itself, it's just a terrific cover, a terrific issue. For all those cover collectors out there, it's just definitely high on my list of great covers. This is a book I would like to upgrade within the next year, but I have to make some other purchases before I do that. This is Daredevil number 1. You could pretty much figure out what this is, the first Daredevil and all that stuff. I know this book has been dormant for several years. I think Daredevil was one of the more affordable big Marvel characters. Daredevil number 1 being a big debut for a big Marvel character. Probably one of the more affordable ones next to Doctor Strange and so forth. What was I going to say about this book? I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily underrated or anything like that. I don't think Daredevil didn't really come into prominence until Frank Miller took over the series and introduced, a real awesome origin to the character and introduced other characters like Elektra and so forth, and wrote excellent storylines with the Kingpin and Bullseye and other stories. So, now I know what I want to say. For years, out of the big Marvel debuts, we're talking about Fantastic Four 1, Tales of Suspense 39, and so forth, the only big book I had out of the big debuts was X-Men number 1. Okay? This was the second of the big debuts. Now, someone might say big debuts, you might put that, in quotes. But I still think that Daredevil is definitely one of the big Marvel characters. Like I said, not as valuable as some of the others, which is fine. But this was the second big Marvel hero debut book I ever purchased. I won it off of Comic Connect several years ago. Amazing Spider-Man number 3. It's a lower grade copy, but I've mentioned this before in other videos. If you saw my previous copy of, I don't remember if I ever showed it. I don't know if I did. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Maybe I was too embarrassed to show it. Nah, I take that back. I wasn't too embarrassed, but it was definitely a low grade copy for sure. And if my friend Eric is watching right now, he was with me when I purchased it back in January 1996 for $50. Anyway, my older copy rather, was it was really bleached. It was missing the pinup. I didn't even know it had a pinup until Julian, Gotham Comics, told me. I was like, oh, it has a pinup, and then I found out, not mine. But I've been meaning to upgrade it for a long time, and I upgraded it to this copy. Amazing Spider-Man 3 is not that easy to find in higher grades, and it's certainly not affordable in higher grades. But I was able to get this book, and I was very happy I was able to do so. And it looks so much better than my previous copy, which I had sold. So it moved on to, a better home, I guess. War Against Crime 10. This book it comes up, okay? It's not impossible to find. It doesn't come up that often. War Against Crime, this is the first Vault Keeper. This is back when EC was doing crime, a lot of crime stories and all that stuff, and then they decided to move off into the new trend. And the new trend were more adult-oriented stories, more adult crime stories, and horror stories. With issue 12, which is a rare book, and a book on my top 10 list for 2019. With issue 12 of War Against Crime, the title was changed to The Vault of Horror, and that was EC's first horror title. I believe that's correct. So, I've always liked the Vault Keeper. When I started reading these books, I knew of the Crypt Keeper from the HBO show, but little did I know that there were 2 other hosts, or 2 other comics. I knew there was Tales from the Crypt. I didn't know there was a Vault of Horror or a Haunt of Fear, let alone a Vault Keeper and the Old Witch. So I was pleased when I saw that there was a Vault Keeper. He looked a lot like the Emperor with the hood on and all that, so it was really nice to see. And he makes his debut in War Against Crime. Like I said, it's not an impossible book to find, but it's not very easy to find either, so it's good to have some of these earlier ECs. The reintroduction of the Submariner. I have always loved this book. Well, at least the cover, rather, because, I was unfamiliar with the contents of inside the book. I had an idea the Submariner was in it, but I remember seeing the cover when I used to collect the Marvel Masterpieces cards that Joe Jusko did in the early 90s. And on the back of the Submariner, you see this cover. This is his Silver Age appearance. I believe he first showed up in 1939, I believe the year. Knights of old would know better than I. But Motion Picture Funnies, I think it was a promotional little comic that never saw the light of day. And then the Submariner, I think, was introduced in Marvel Comics number 1, or reintroduced in Marvel Comics number 1, and later went on to be one of Timely's Golden Age anti-heroes. She was drawn really, really cool back in the Golden Age. Some of those covers with the Submariner and the Human Torch and Captain America were classics, absolute classics. And I like the way he's drawn here. I like it, he's looking into his hand, or at least it looks like he's looking into his hands because he's so upset that Sue Storm is being abducted by the Submariner. Yeah, very overdramatic, but cool cover. I was lucky to get this book before the craze for it started. I got it once again a couple years ago. And it was about maybe, a year ago the book started to spike. Speculation. Here we go, the next book on the list. World's Finest Comics, number 3. It is a classic cover, but it's not one of my favorite covers. Okay? The significance of this book, other than being the oldest comic in my collection, it is the first appearance of the Batman foe, the Scarecrow. I forget. I think he's like one of the last stories in here. But anyway, yeah, this was really interesting for me to get because it's the oldest book in my collection. What year is it? 40, 41, something like that? I remember when I came back to the hobby several years ago, the oldest book in my collection was The Amazing Spider-Man number 3, that ratty copy I was talking about a few moments ago. This is like from July 1963. And I had a coverless copy of X-Men number 1, which was September 1963. So those are my 2 old books. And I was like, wow, to have a book from the 50s would be cool, but let alone have a book from the 40s was even cooler. So yeah, this is the oldest book in my collection. And here we go. Tales to Astonish 27. And this definitely, I love the cover. One of my favorite Marvel early silver covers. I like the creepiness of it. It is creepy. Ants, dragging a little man into their hill. It has all the makings of a 50s horror movie, which is good, which is a good thing. I've always liked those cheesy B-movie horror films of the 50s with giant bugs and all that stuff. Reminiscent of them, I guess. But anyway, when it comes to comic book significance, this is the first appearance, for those that don't know, of Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man. And we know him as Michael Douglas in the movies, right? So they're carrying Michael Douglas off into the anthill. Pretty cool book. Once again, one of my favorite early Marvel silver covers. Forgive me if I'm not saying the numbers because I forget. I had a good thing going, but I forgot. Fantastic Four number 5, bar none, Doctor Doom is the most significant Marvel Comics villain. He is. I don't think anyone even comes close. There are some very significant Marvel villains like Magneto and the Green Goblin and others. No insult to Thanos or anything like that. But I do think that Doctor Doom is the biggest and will always be the biggest. And he makes his debut in Fantastic Four. He's primarily the villain of the Fantastic Four, but he really is the villain of the entire Marvel Universe as he has shown over the years. He's been a pest and a danger to mostly every major character in the Marvel Universe. And he made his debut here in number 5. It's a low grade copy, as you can see. Looks pretty good. I had a restored copy. I sold it to fund getting another book that's on this list. I have no regrets on that. I was glad to get this book when I did, even though when I got this book, the prices were starting to get high, and now they're like really, really high. So I don't know. It's sometimes it's difficult to get these books. It really is, especially for new collectors who may not have a whole lot of money. Now, remember when I was talking about the Green Goblin, how I wanted to buy that for hopefully $150 back in '94? Well, with that $150, I got this. And if you watched my previous videos, my comic book history, you'll know the history of this book. This is a book I purchased with $150. It was a It's a high-grade book. It's about 9.0. I purchased it without even knowing that there was a Marvel stamp in it. Fortunately, it does have the Marvel stamp. I went into a convention in February 1994, one of those Hotel Sheraton conventions. There was a big snowstorm, and we were unsure if it was a big snowstorm that Friday, so the convention was on Saturday. And right here, as I'm reaching for it, this Wizard magazine, this was the magazine that told me about the convention in which I bought this. I'm just going to flip through it right now at the end. This is how I found out about these conventions. I didn't have Overstreet. I didn't even know what the hell Overstreet was. Not that Overstreet would tell you anyway, but this was my price guide too. So here we go. There was always a ton of conventions in New Jersey and New York. Now here, the convention, the date, and the place in which I purchased this book when we had that big snowstorm was February. No. Here we are. February 12th. 1994, in Woodbridge, New Jersey, at the Sheraton Hotel off of Route 1 South. That was the day I purchased this book, as it says in here. I'm not going to do a close-up of it. I purposely kept this Wizard for that fact, because this is, when I got this book, it was the most expensive book in my collection at that point, and it was a nice-looking book. I had a lot of very low-grade books at that time, because that's all I could afford. This was the first book in my collection back then that I actually had a nice copy. And that's why it's very, very important to me that I was actually able to get something very, very nice. Very, very nice when it comes to condition. First appearance of the Punisher, in case you didn't know. Now, we talked about the Marvel stamp, right? I've had several copies of this book over the years. My first copy came 2 months after I purchased my last book. So it came in April 1994. And I purchased this book from a dishonest seller in Canada. He told me that the book had a subscription crease. He explained what that was. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I don't mind. But he failed to tell me that the Marvel stamp was removed. And I remember just looking at it and I was like, oh, God. Now, I know some people, to each his own. People collect maybe incomplete books. Maybe there's a wrap missing or half a page missing or a stamp or a coupon cut out, and they're okay with it. Hey, to each his own. But I have my pet peeves when it comes to comic book collecting, and one of them is incomplete books. And I just don't like incomplete books. They irk me. So I upgraded it many, many years ago to the copy you see right here. So that's the story with the Incredible Hulk 181. We're trying to wind down now. There we go. Batman 121, first appearance of Mr. Freeze. I feel that this book added legitimacy to my collection. Legitimacy to my Batman collection, because I never had any of the really, really big Batman villains. I've had the Silver Age appearances and so forth, which are cool and very nice to have, but I never had the real true first appearances until this book. And I believe I showed this book off from Comic Book Hall number 10, which was June 2015. Now, other than the having this book, showing it off, being happy that I was able to get the first appearance of Mr. Freeze, one of the things that I believe I also mentioned in that video, and it's something I think about every time I look at this issue, I believe in that video I mentioned that my wife was pregnant with my son. And every time I look at Batman 121, not only do I have in my mind, it's the first time I got a really good Batman book, first major villain appearance, all that legitimacy crap and all that stuff, I think of my son. Moving along. We're almost done. We're getting there. Couldn't tell you what number we're on, but hopefully you were keeping track. Crime Patrol 15. Not an easy book to find. Not an impossible book to locate, but not an easy book to find. This is the first appearance of the Crypt Keeper. it's obviously significant in comic book history, but it's very significant for me. I talked about my love of EC. I've talked about my love of EC in videos, and there'll be more videos like that coming. But to actually finally get the character that introduced me to comic books, really, I mean, comic book collecting, because obviously I've known about Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Lantern, all that stuff years before I even considered buying a comic book or even cared to have a comic book in my collection. We all knew about those characters. But the character that made me actually want to go out and buy a comic book was the Crypt Keeper. And this is his first appearance, so it has not only meaning when it comes to comic book collecting, it has meaning for me. And you can hear all about it again by checking out former videos of mine where I taught when I showed that book. Now here is a low-grade copy of another book that's pretty sought out right now. Fantastic Four #1. It's probably a 1.5. This was actually another book that I purchased a couple of years ago before the hype for Fantastic Four started again. It was maybe 6 months after I had purchased this that people were starting to pay attention to people have always paid attention to Fantastic Four. I shouldn't say just started, but I think a lot of people that were paying more attention to Amazing Fantasy 15 and Tales of Suspense 39 and so forth and so on started to look at Fantastic Four again. You know, I enjoyed the movies. Now, I know there were 4 movies. There was the original one from the early 90s by Roger Corman, which was awful. But I enjoyed the middle 2, which were the, I guess, reboots from 2005 and 2007. I didn't mind them. I know some people say they're terrible movies. I'm not saying they're great movies. I'm saying I enjoyed them. And I didn't really like the reboot, the second reboot that came out a couple years ago. I think after that movie came out, a lot of people may have thought that the Fantastic Four, when it comes to making movies, was dead. Well, now there's speculation about the Fantastic Four coming out, and that's what caused this to really spike to crazy prices. Like I said, I have a low-grade copy, so it's nothing to write home about, and it's certainly not going to turn anyone's head. It's not going to turn heads, but it's just another book I never thought I would have, and it's not because of the price. It's because, I never thought about collecting Fantastic Four 1. Never thought about adding it to my collection, but an opportunity came up, and I took it. And here it is. Here's another one that I wanted for a while, and I finally got it, and I kept it. Obviously, I kept it, and super happy I did. Albedo 2. This is a rare book. There's only 2,000 of them in the world, and I'm happy I have a 9.0. Even if I didn't have a 9.0, I've been happy just to have the book. It's a rare book. First Usagi Yojimbo. My introduction to Usagi came in the late 80s, early 90s, when he was teaming up with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the cartoon. And they sold the Usagi Yojimbo figure with the Playmates line in the late 80s, early 90s. And that's how I knew who he was. And I just always, every time I look at Usagi, I think of him as one of the turtle allies that comes up every now and then. We are down to the last 1, 2, 3, 4. So here's number 4 on the list. X-Men 1. Like I said way early in this video, you've been with me for 35 minutes. Hopefully it's a long video because I talk a lot through it. Just to show you that there's a little bit more under the surface than just, hey, look at this, X-Men #1. Hey, look at this, Albedo 2. There's a lot more about these books than what they are. It's more of a meaning for me. Let's talk about the meaning of X-Men 1 briefly, because I do want to actually finish this thing up. X-Men 1, I was always Spider-Man and the X-Men were always my favorite Marvel characters back in the early 90s, and I had a coverless copy of this book for many years, over 2 decades. I sold it, a couple years ago. Probably should have held on to it for a little while and sold it now. Probably would have doubled my money. Should have done that, but no big deal. Anyway, one of the things I always wanted to get when I came back to comic book collecting was to one day get a covered copy of X-Men 1. And I did. This is actually my second copy of X-Men #1. I originally purchased one several years ago, and I sold it to fund another book, and it just so happened that I was able to get this book a month later. The original one I had the light green variant, and this one I got the dark green variant, but it was the same grade. I didn't get it to upgrade it. I just got it to have it again in my collection. But one of the things that I said to myself after I had sold my original copy of X-Men 1, I said, if I'm going to get another one of these, I want it to look better in a sense than my previous copy. Well, how's it looking better? It's still a 3.0. It looks a lot better. The page quality was cream. The cover was bleached. The red, the color, the richness in the red was sucked right out. It was it wasn't a very pretty looking 3.0. Now this probably has the same defects, most of them, as the other one. There's a little piece out over here and all that other stuff. But one thing that this has is over the other one is great colors. It has really great colors. And that was very important to me when I went looking for another X-Men 1 and I found this copy. So I was very happy at that. Last three. At number 3, Detective Comics 140, the first appearance of the Riddler. This is the true first appearance of the Riddler. It's not his Silver Age appearance. He only made 2 appearances in the Golden Age. This being the first, and Detective 142 being the second. And then he disappeared for, 15, 16 years, whatever it was. And then he showed up again in 1966. Or was it 60? I think it was 66, right? 66, 67, something like that. I don't remember the exact year. And he was, I believe, the first villain to show up on the Batman 66. It was set up for 66. The first villain for Batman to face in the Batman 66 series. He was portrayed by Frank Gorshin, more famously by Frank Gorshin, and he was also portrayed by Sean Astin's father, for, I believe, one episode. Riddler is definitely one of the more memorable characters from the late Golden Age era, and he has definitely become one of the top 5 Batman villains. Of course, we all know the Joker's number 1. He will never be dethroned. It's up for debate on who's number 2, 3, 4, and 5. I tend to think number 2 is the Riddler. But some people may say the Penguin, which I could understand. But the Penguin doesn't get as much love as the Riddler, does he? Riddler definitely a cool villain to have in your collection. I said this many years ago. This was my holy grail. That I thought I would be able to get. I'm glad I got it when I did. It's restored. It has some glue on the spine. I might have that glue removed. I may not. I don't know. It's just something that something to toy around with in the future. But at number 3 on this list, Detective 140. Last 2. Number 2, my other restored book in my collection, because I don't care to pay the outrageous price for it unrestored, or I shouldn't say unrestored. It's kind of silly. Not restored. The Incredible Hulk #1. It's out of Silver Age books, there's an abundance of them. There's an abundance of Amazing Fantasies. There's an abundance of Amazing Spider-Man 1s. There's an abundance of Fantastic Four 1s. Obviously not in high grade, then they become rare. But there are a lot of them out there. You can pick and find the right copy and the right price for you if obviously if you have the money. But Hulk 1 is kind of hard to find. I mean, it's not hard to find. You could go on eBay and find it and go to cons, but there are less Hulk 1s, is what I'm trying to say, than there are X-Men #1s. This opportunity came a year ago to purchase this book. A year ago from my local comic book shop, and I said that I like the price. I'm not going to spend the price for a 2.5 blue on Hulk 1. It just doesn't make sense to me, because the Hulk is, although I'd like to have it in my collection, it's not something that I'm going to spend too much time trying to get. Restored price, I brought it home. It's nice to have the book. So at number 2, Hulk 1, the first appearance of the Incredible Hulk, and a couple other characters. And number 1 on the list by far, we've seen this before on my channel. You've seen this on other people's channels. Amazing Fantasy 15. I had gotten this book a year ago, almost right after the Hulk. I had to sell a couple books to get this one. A good handful of them, but it was just another one of those things that just worked out perfectly for me. It wasn't a struggle to sell the books I wanted to sell. It wasn't a struggle to get this. I mean, I wanted to find the right looking copy for me. I knew I couldn't go beyond a certain number. I knew my limits, and like I said, there are plenty of these out there, and this popped up with a tip from ETA Nick, of course. Got to give him credit for that. And I went for it. It has a little bit of Marvel chipping. Nothing, not severe Marvel chipping. It's obviously miswrapped. It's the wrap could be a lot better. As you can see, when I turn this thing over, let's take a look at the back cover. And you see the wrap is all the way back here. But from the Grader's notes, which I purchased, the center, everything's attached. The cover's attached. The centerfold's attached. There's a little bit of writing on the splash page. That's what the Grader notes said. But other than that, you see there's creases, color-breaking creases. I don't think this book was pressed originally. This book was graded in 2010. Who knows? Maybe it was pressed, but I don't think so because I could see little bends over here. But originally it was graded in 2010, and I wanted to get it in a nice new slab. And if you watch my unboxing of Amazing Fantasy 15, I talk about the ordeal I went through with CGC, who were very professional and straightened it out for me, what I went through with getting this book back. Once again, I thank you. Like I said, these videos are not for everybody, but I wanted to do it because I enjoy doing these type of videos, among other videos, many different videos on my channel. I hope you stuck with me throughout the 43 minutes. If you didn't, if you just skipped around, I don't blame you. It's kind of long and boring. But I enjoy not only showing these books, but I enjoy talking about them, the history about them, the history that some of them have, some of the history they have in the hobby, but more importantly, the history they have with me and my collecting over the last, it's going to be 30 years in a few years. So it's been around for a long time, not as long as others, but I've been around in the hobby for a while. And I like talking about and showing these books how meaningful some of them are and exactly why. So I was glad that for those of you that stuck with me throughout this whole 45 minutes, I'm glad you did. And I thank you, and I'll talk with everybody soon. Take care, everybody.